All right. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing good tonight. It's kind of our last class of sort of content delivered from me to you. Starting next week, we're going to be doing group presentations. So we'll come back to that at the end of the lecture. But for today, kind of here's the structure of how things are going to go. We're going to talk about this case study. So I mentioned it last week. So we're going to talk a little bit, then we're going to watch a very short movie, about 9 minutes, and then we're going to talk some more. After the case study, we'll break. Then we'll do a quick concept review, just everything that we've done in the course. After that, multiple choice practice. So thanks to everyone who submitted multiple choice questions. So most of them were quite good. So I've used a bunch of them here, lightly edited, that we can all go through together. Some of them will appear on the final exam. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little bit more about presentations. If you guys have questions, you can ask during break or you can ask at the end. And we can kind of just look at that stuff. All right, cool. So let's get going. Oh, sorry, before we get going, this is kind of the last opportunity for you guys to get any participation marks in terms of speaking up in class and sort of contributing to the discussion. So I got a lot of you last week, which was great. But if you haven't spoken yet, so you either haven't provided a response to the survey and kind of discussed that in class after being called on, or you didn't kind of contribute last week during kind of our big blitz of contributions, definitely prioritize speaking up, answering questions. I will try to call on you if I don't see a lot of responses to a question I pose, but I'm not gonna be able to get all of you. So you know who you are. Definitely try to jump in when you can to get those participation marks. Yeah, Tarek?
I don't think you called on me, but I've participated and added to the discussion. Does that still count?
In terms of in chat?
No, I would speak up and stuff but I don't think you ever called on my name specifically.
Yeah, so if you spoke up during any of the discussions, like just volunteered, then it counts for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely have you recorded here. Okay, cool. All right, then let's get going. So today we're going to be talking about this drug company, Eli Lilly, and I guess what would be considered kind of a blockbuster drug. So a huge seller, and basically invented the category. The drug was called Prozac. The category was depression. So this was kind of like the first mainstream, widely accepted treatment for depression, created by this company. And for a long time, this kind of was the pillar of Eli Lilly's profitability. They've kind of since moved on to other things for reasons we'll describe in a few slides. But this was kind of a huge deal for them. So let's do a little bit of background. So we're talking about the treatment of depression, which is what this drug Prozac was designed to treat. So going way, way back, by kind of like the late 1800s, we have the development of psychiatry and psychoanalysis, situations where you have Jung, you have Freud, you sit down in a chair, you talk about things, they sort of analyze you and describe what ailment you might have. This is very costly to do, right? To kind of meet one-on-one with someone. It's also fairly unscientific in the sense that, these people basically had theories substantiated by nothing, but kind of random observations. There was nothing sort of systematic about these treatments, right? So a big change in the US happened in the 1950s. So prior to the 1950s, and the US is going to be kind of the market we focused on, what we focus on today. In the 1950s, you basically had this push to deinstitutionalize people suffering from mental illnesses. So prior to the 1950s, you would see them locked up in sort of hospitals, and that's kind of how society was dealing with mental illness. 1950s, these government-run hospitals were shut down, and mental health patients were sort of released into the general public. I think there's a book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then there's a show on Netflix, Ratchet, which kind of like details what it was like. You know, it's obviously like a fictionalized interpretation, but kind of what it was like in these mental health institutions. So with this kind of deinstitutionalization, suddenly we had basically a large market of mentally ill people, right? There's these people out there, they have an illness, they have an ailment, but it's also an environment where insurance is not covering drugs to treat depression, right? So the government insurance is not covering it, and insurance companies are also not covering it. So we basically have this kind of large market that no one's really participating in. Into this market, we kind of have the first modern revolutions in drug therapy. So here was kind of like one of the first blockbuster drugs for mental health, not depression, but for kind of psychoses. So things like, bipolar disorder or things like that. So this was chlorpromazine, brand name Thorazine, to treat major psychoses. And this kind of opened the door for pharmaceutical treatments, right? This was like a blockbuster drug that kind of removed some of the barriers to treating mental illnesses with drugs. Once that barriers come down, we do start to see some depression drugs in kind of the 1960s and 1970s. Your main bet, if you want a pharmaceutical treatment for depression, is what's called a TCA, which were effective, but very tricky to use. So getting the dosages correct was difficult. There's lots of side effects. It's toxic in high doses. So difficult for patients to use, difficult for doctors to prescribe, right? And they have kind of a mechanism of action. Here's just basically a picture for the sake of showing a picture of, information leaping between two neurons, right? So TCAs are treating depression in this particular way, but they're difficult to use. So into this, we have Eli Lilly. So what's the background on Eli Lilly, this pharmaceutical company? So founded in the 1800s, kind of from the very beginning, this company was focused on consulting with doctors, with medical practitioners about the efficacy of the products they were developing, as well as, the mechanism of action, right? I have this drug, it works, why does it work, right? They kind of want to know all these things, kind of have very scientific backdrop for why is this drug good to prescribe and good to sell. So they collaborated with some local people, some Toronto scientists to cheaply manufacture insulin. So that's nice local touch. In the 1950s, they helped manufacture the Salk vaccine for polio. And they're a big powerhouse by 1976, mostly focusing on things like antibiotics, anti-inflammation, arthritis. So notice these are all drugs designed to deal with physical ailments, right? Polio, insulin for diabetes, antibiotics for infections, right? There's zero focus for Eli Lilly on psychiatric medications, right? And partly that's because, they're always very focused on the science. And for mental illnesses, there really was not that much science at this point. Okay. So that's our context for mental illness. We have our context for our firm. And now we think, okay, what does kind of the development of a drug look like so that we can think about this particular drug? So the development cycle of a drug typically goes like this. Company discovers and patents a new compound. It's the very first thing, some new chemical compound. And then what they do is they do studies on how this drug impacts the target chemicals in the body, right? So they're targeting some particular chemical, and they're kind of trying to see, what is the effect, what really is the effect of the drug on that chemical, right? Is there any effect or not, right? And we'll come back to that idea of a chemical in a second. So human studies about whether the drug is safe and effective will then follow after the lab studies. And then you will submit to the Food and Drug Administration in the US. Hopefully you'll get approved. And then you can start marketing and selling your drug, right? Post-development, you'll develop line extensions. You'll try to sort of branch out from this initial compound see what else it can do. Maybe research some side effects, manage your product liability, until finally your patent expires, right? Your patent expires, and then all of a sudden generic manufacturers can sell this compound too. So competition intensifies, right? In our pricing lecture, we saw this happen with Lipitor, right? With the cholesterol managing drug. So this is the development cycle of a drug. Once you patent the compound, you have kind of a ticking deadline before you don't really make any money from it anymore, before it becomes generic and sellable by everyone. So you have a limited amount of time to market it, sell it, and recoup your initial, typically very large costs of developing the drug. Okay. So here we kind of start to discuss things, right? So early 70s, we have a senior Lilly pharmacologist, and he sees that there's some European research that low concentrations of serotonin, a particular chemical in the brain, low concentrations of that chemical is linked to depression. And he tries to interest his bosses at Lilly in the idea that maybe a drug based on serotonin could impact the processes connected to depression, right? And Lilly was initially resistant, right? So the research is beginning, but it's not really there, right? So pharmacology of the drug, not really sure how that would work. And in addition, we see that kind of any antidepressant drug would also be difficult to market. Why? Because we're entering this setting where there's a big stigma associated with depression, right? Still kind of largely viewed as a character flaw, not viewed as a mental illness, right? So we see here Lilly is initially resistant, right? That's kind of the statement that's made. So let me ask you guys why, based on what we've seen so far about, you know, the market and for mental illness and Eli Lilly itself, why might Eli Lilly be resistant to developing a new drug in the category of depression treating drugs? Yeah, Alexandra.
Even if the drug works per se, and even if they are the only company in the mental illness market or people with mental illness in that market, their brand could be affected. So people that have a stigma against mental illness could be like, okay, this company's, you know, crazy for making mental illness drugs. We don't even believe in like mental illness right now. Maybe their other drugs are also really bad. For example, like if that's their mindset, right? Like customers they already have, they could lose their relationship with customers that they already have. So it might not be worth it to them. Great point. Yeah, the stigma might kind of like contaminate their brand value just by kind of operating in this space. It kind of raises a lot of eyebrows, like, you know, what are you guys doing? Yeah, Angelica?
They've already found success in like other pharmaceuticals, as you mentioned, like antibiotics, anti-inflammation, arthritis. So like for them to kind of reinvest their resources into something so like new, maybe they just didn't see that it was like worth it.
Yeah, so for something so new, right, and investing their resources, the cost side of this is a big deal, right? Does Eli Lilly have any expertise in this category? No, not at all, right? So why would they kind of take away resources from things that they're good at and put them into kind of this long shot that they're not necessarily good at, right? And what about this idea of, you know, the pharmacology of the drug is poorly understood? Like no one really would know how this drug is working, just that it's kind of, you know, affecting the brain chemistry in a way that alleviates depression.
I think that only means that we should wait a bit before actually producing the drug because it might have some negative impacts.
Good. So there might be negative impacts that we don't know about, right? So very unknown. Yeah, Eric.
I think it's also because like the pharmacology of the drug is poorly understood. Like if they understood more about it, they would be less hesitant to actually go in, because if you're going in with like many unknowns, it's not good for risk assessment in terms of like actually producing a drug that works if you don't really understand much about it.
Good. So don't really understand how it works. How are we going to be sure that it's like actually going to work out for us as a profitable investment? Yeah. Good. So Yeah, I think these are good points, right? In general, marketing a stigma, a product with a stigma attached to it is difficult, right? In terms of a SWOT analysis, sort of how do you think about this idea of like there being a stigma around this product? Yeah, Rahima?
I think it's a threat because it's external and it's a bad thing. So
yeah, definitely. So yeah, the external part of it being a stigma means it would affect any company that tried to operate in this space, for sure. And then we also see that kind of Eli Lilly has some specific weaknesses around this drug, given the cost side, given their brand reputation for kind of science-based approaches. So kind of, even though we have all of these issues with it, Eli Lilly obviously decides to move forward. They see that there's some positive lab trials and they kind of go ahead with it, right? Perfect. So that's kind of what they chose to do. It worked in the lab, it worked on humans. Then basically they have their ticking deadline where they have to sell enough of it to make back their money. Rahima, do you still have a question or is your hand just up from before? It's maybe just up from before. So at this point, let's take a look at this kind of short video. It's about 9 minutes. Here's a few questions that I want you to think about. What segments is Eli Lilly targeting with their marketing? I'd recommend kind of take notes. Anytime you kind of hear a segment pop up, just make a note of it. What were their communication objectives for those segments and their message? And then what media did they choose for each segment? And what was kind of their promotional mix for each segment? So things, you know, like, did they use sales promotions? Did they use advertising? Did they use personal selling, public relations, or direct marketing, that kind of thing? All right. All right, so let me see if you guys can hear. All right, you guys should have just heard like a nice little chime. All right, perfect. All right, so let's take a look and then we'll discuss it.
It's the hottest psychiatric drug in history.
Prozac.
Prozac.
Prozac, a wonder drug that works wonders.
At the end of 1987, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved a new antidepressant, and Prozac hit the American market. Advertising and word
Sorry about that.
of mouth helped boost the drug's reputation, and Prozac became the it drug of the 1990s.
Models in the latest fashions are said to look Prozac deprived.
Before long, the name was on everyone's tongue.
I was on Prozac for a long time.
And, it seemed, everyone was using it.
6 million Americans using Prozac right now.
The greater the drug's popularity, the more it seemed to symbolize.
Prozac moves from being a successfully launched pharmaceutical product to being a true cultural celebrity.
You know it's the holiday season in New York City when the drug dealers are selling more Prozac than crack.
So how did this little pill become the icon of an era?
For people who suffer depression, it's been hailed as a virtual miracle.
Almost immediately after Prozac's launch, it was clear that it offered a promising alternative to available treatments for depression.
I started giving it to difficult patients, patients who hadn't done well somewhere else, and people thought I could get help with something I've lived with for years.
The drug was an enormous medical breakthrough. Prozac emerged as a pioneer in a new category of drugs called SSRIs that targeted one chemical in the brain, serotonin, instead of many.
It plays a crucial role in mood, appetite, and many other brain functions. Many antidepressive drugs have severe side effects. It was largely a lack of those problems that has persuaded doctors to prescribe Prozac to 2 million Americans.
One of those was student Elizabeth Wurtzel.
I had been on other medications before that didn't work nearly so well, but it really changed everything. There was one morning when I woke up and I felt like the idea of being alive didn't seem so awful. It was an amazing turnaround.
The drug led her to break the historical taboo about depression and write a book about hers.
I knew it was pretty safe to tell the story because I knew a lot of people would relate to it. I think that's what I was betting on. If I wrote it, it would make people feel better.
Wurtzel quickly became the Generation X face of the drug.
Seems like everyone's doctor is dealing this stuff now.
But Wurtzel's book was not the only one that captured the public imagination. Psychiatrist and author Peter Kramer wrote his from the perspective of the treating physician.
People who do well on it may say, this is my real self. The transformation is not away from the self, but towards some ideal self.
He then went on to speculate about how Prozac might change us in ways never before expected.
I thought, what will happen if we can do this with people who've never been depressed? You know, if you could put someone on a medicine and he or she would become more socially adept. And I coined a term, cosmetic psychopharmacology, where the analogy was cosmetic surgery, so a medical procedure done for something other than treating illness.
Kramer's narrative about Prozac being able to change people's essential selves took hold.
Many claim that it transforms them, makes them more calm, more confident, more productive, somehow better than well.
Get in the hole. That's what I'm looking for. That's what makes you come back. I found that taking this medicine, this drug, I became a different person.
But it wasn't just the promise of a personal metamorphosis that made Prozac a household name.
There's nothing wrong with you that can't be cured with a little Prozac and a polo mallet.
Here we go. Here comes the Prozac.
Prozac's popularity wasn't just the result of a medical breakthrough, but also of a marketing one.
Prozac's marketing helped popularize the idea that our moods are neurochemical and that there are things we can do to change them.
Prozac took the mystery out of the science. It talked about how the drug worked.
Another way the drug's benefits were sold to the public was through its name. Eli Lilly hired branding agency Interbrand to come up with a memorable one.
Prozac has two syllables. The first syllable, PRO, was designed to suggest professional. The AC is designed to communicate activity. Coupled with the Z, it just sounds much more powerful and more effective as a name.
But it wasn't just the name that gave Prozac a leg up.
One of the first places that news about Prozac appears is in popular financial magazines, things that are reporting on its potential blockbuster status, how it's going to make a ton of money for its producers, and this kind of creates this buzz.
It was remarkable. I mean, New York Magazine had this pill on its cover. I don't think anything like that had happened before.
As media coverage of the drug grew, stories about a possible link to suicide began to circulate. In 1991, the FDA convened hearings on the issue.
I finally admitted myself to a stress center. I begged them, lock me up because I'm going to die and I don't want to die.
No conclusive link was found, and the sale of Prozac continued.
This medicine had the career arc of a celebrity, that it was sort of overhyped and then demonized and, trying to find its level through the press.
Ever since Prozac was introduced 5 years ago, it has developed what amounts to a cult following.
Before long, as other SSRIs began to eat away at Eli Lilly's market share, Prozac ads began appearing in general interest magazines rather than just medical journals, targeting patients, particularly women, instead of just their doctors. And commercials ran on TV for the first time.
People wanted control. They wanted to talk about their successes, their personal successes. And Prozac spoke to that.
Talk to your doctor today.
And it also introduced something new for sale. Since the 1950s, consumer goods like cars and washing machines had become symbols of success and happiness. Now, there was something else.
Prozac is saying that happiness itself is available for purchase and can be one of these things that defines what it means to be an American and have that American dream.
And the more people who claim their share of it, the better Eli Lilly's bottom line. In 2001, with the patent set to expire, they launched a new drug for a new problem.
Serafem is not really a new drug. It's just a new name for the popular antidepressant Prozac, now repackaged with a distinctly feminine look. Some accuse the drug manufacturer of trying to create a new market for Prozac by grossly exaggerating premenstrual problems.
Think it's PMS?
Did you take my keys?
Maybe it's PMDD.
Soon the airwaves were full of ads for other drugs promising to treat problems most of us didn't know we had.
I had restless leg syndrome.
Latisse, the first and only FDA-approved prescription treatment for inadequate or not enough lashes. Your lashes actually grow.
You do have a whole bunch of new pharmaceuticals coming out to enable people to do things that they like to do, so to be able to eat a bunch of cheeseburgers.
Time to see your doctor about America's most prescribed acid control medicine.
Or to be able to have sex. You have drugs like Viagra coming out. These are responding to genuine human needs and desires, but those needs and desires hadn't always been configured as illnesses the way they were during and after the Prozac era.
I think Prozac made people very aware of the possibility that medicines were going to step out of their bounds and be used by people who maybe had some quality that wasn't rewarded socially, and to move to some state that was better socially rewarded.
All right. So a lot of information there. Yeah, what do you guys think? Hot takes. Good time, wild ride. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so before the movie, or before the YouTube video, I kind of asked you, so what segments are out there that Eli Lilly was sort of targeting with their marketing? Yeah, it's still like a household name. Yeah, Angelica?
Right away, I think the obvious answer is like people with depression, but later on, they specifically targeted women in their marketing.
For sure. Yeah. So depression, yeah, that was definitely right away. At the end, this thing with Serafem, women. Yeah, Eric?
I think I remember them mentioning that it was initially marketed towards the doctors first. And then that's like afterwards when they like put it into like not only medical journals, but in like economic and general journals, that it like sort of opened up to the general public.
Definitely. Right. And why would you market to doctors?
I mean, they're the ones prescribing them, right? So they would be the ones to look for that medicine whenever they're trying to treat these like issues with people, like specifically depression, because then it becomes their miracle drug. Why else use anything else, I suppose, if it works so well with no side effects, like as they mentioned.
Yeah. So from the perspective of kind of marketing, you do have kind of these sort of push and pull mechanisms too, right? Like people should be asking for it and doctors should be willing to prescribe it. Yeah, Vanessa?
Yeah, so just kind of add on top of what Eric was saying. I know they mentioned professionals being like the first half of the whole name of Prozac. So I guess people also just in like a bigger professional industry, they're talking about the economic journals. So you think people like on Wall Street that could be very like anxious in a high strung job that would need something to kind of more calm them down and get them on a level that they can work really well. So something along the lines of that as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So kind of it started out as basically depression focused, right? But by the end, we're kind of thinking, well, there's maybe some behavioral benefits more generally, right? Yeah, Shoaib?
So towards like the beginning of the video, it kind of seemed like it was like the hip thing or like the culturally in thing at the time. So I think it was kind of targeted as towards like obviously the general audience or general public, but specifically towards like young adults without explicitly saying that it was targeted towards young adults.
Right. Okay. So young adults. So like this woman who spoke about sort of her experience in this book that she wrote.
Yeah, that would be an example.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so good. Yeah, and Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, seemed like towards the end, they kind of tried to like push their product, and like through sort of media and everything, they like exaggerated people's like problems and then symptoms of like regular things to make people think that they need medication for it. So I guess they were kind of targeting more like the general population, or like women in general that are not really depressed or like sick.
Right. So there's this idea brought up of cosmetic psychopharmacology, right? Where you can just be, there doesn't have to be anything wrong with you. You can take it and just be better, right? A better self. Yeah, Athena?
I just wanted to say it might not just be young adults, because there was one woman who was sharing her story, and she was crying because she's been dealing with depression for so long. So it might be targeted to people who were like afraid to come out at first about their mental illnesses, and they're like kind of getting rid of the stigma.
Yeah, that's a great point. So definitely like kind of quite a broad targeting in the population, right? So pretty much anyone who feels like they could benefit from, removing a social anxiety, even kind of by the end was potentially a target. Let's see. So Parnika asks, towards the end, when they marketed to the general audience, did it mean that it did not have to be prescribed at that point? No, it's always been a prescription drug. It's never been over the counter. It's always had to be through a doctor and a pharmacist. Exactly. Ask your doctor. So we've identified sort of the individuals. We've identified physicians. This guy, Dr. Peter Kramer, who we saw him hunched over his laptop in 1980, and then we saw him hunched over his laptop in 19. He was a particular kind of doctor, right? A psychiatrist. What are kind of the difficulties of marketing to a psychiatrist versus a physician for this kind of a drug? Yeah, Eric.
Sorry if I'm taking like basically just like a sort of leap of faith in like connecting the dots, but perhaps it's like doctors would be more in line with prescribing a drug rather than a treatment, a regimen towards like mental health issues, while psychiatrists would be looking for more of like the base cause of why you are depressed rather than treating it and just working through it rather than actually just prescribing a drug.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. So I feel like there's definitely an element of truth to that, in the sense that, a psychiatrist has other tools at their disposal that they would be trained in. So they might be looking at it more holistically, like as a combination of tools to help solve the overall or underlying.
Maybe a better way of putting it would be that the physicians would treat depression as a solely physical ailment rather than like a mental health issue, which a psychiatrist might actually deal with.
Right. So a psychiatrist potentially is someone who wants to resolve the underlying whatever trauma or issue that kind of potentially is leading to the depression. Right. Whereas a physician might say it's purely a chemical imbalance.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, Rahima.
Adding to Eric's point, so I think because if psychiatrists, they start recommending Prozac, then they're basically sending their customers away and be like, you don't need therapy and stuff, you can just take Prozac. One Prozac a day keeps the doctor away or whatever.
Yeah, and they're the doctor in that case, right? So take Prozac, you don't need us anymore. So potentially you're trying to market this drug to people who the drug is competing with, right? They prescribe the drug, but they also compete with the drug. So potentially a difficulty there. So what else? Who else needs to be marketed to? So we're in the US, we're in this specific environment, although this would count for Canada as well, given how we pay for our drugs. Actually, how do we pay for our drugs in Canada? If you need to go buy something, a prescription, who pays? Right, so they're subsidized by taxes. Some stuff is covered by OHIP, Puya says, but insurance. Yeah, so if you're under 25, you get it covered, but if you're not, then you need insurance. So insurance covers the drug, and so the insurance companies would also need to be marketed to, right? Because without them on board, they're not going to want to cover the drug. They decide what's in their formulary, right? Am I going to pay for this drug or am I not going to pay for this drug as part of the health plan that I'm offering, right? So another kind of element that needs to be marketed to, another segment. And then one last bit here, we see, the basic attitude of the average Lilly person. So the average employee of Lilly is, why is Lilly doing this? We're the insulin company, the antibiotic company. Why are we going into a market we know nothing about? And even worse, into a market for mind-bending drugs for people too weak to pull themselves together. So there you see that stigma. So this is kind of one more group that needs to be marketed to, which is the employees, right? That's internal marketing. Does anyone know? So doctors decide which drugs they want to be prescribing, right? They diagnose you and then they decide which drug. Does anyone know, how do doctors decide which drugs they want to be prescribing? What's that process look like, where they decide what they think is best? Yeah, Rahima?
So they do, it depends on like what's best for the patient, but some brands, they pitch like personally to doctors and then they ask them to promote their drugs. So if they're getting incentives to prescribe a certain drug, they'd probably just prescribe it more over a competing brand.
Right. So yeah, some brands you kind of described, they kind of push the drug somehow. So you're not allowed to offer monetary incentives, as far as I know, at least in Canada. But you can give out free samples and you can provide information to the doctor. And, you can also do things like take the doctor out for lunch and all sorts of stuff like that. It's called physician detailing. It's a very big source of expense for pharmaceutical companies, but they spend it through these sales reps, right? So sales reps go out and visit the doctors with the free samples, and they kind of take them out to lunch and things like that. So the sales reps are the ones who you're going to want to be marketing to, right? As Eli Lilly, this is a segment that they can't ignore, based on kind of all of this stuff in the past, right? About the stigma associated with it, and Eli Lilly being a particular kind of company. Yeah, so Shoaib said something about doctors in the States getting kickback. So I think that should be illegal, but you definitely have a range of doctors, right? You've heard maybe of like some doctors in the US operating like pill mills, where they'll basically write a prescription for a pain drug for almost anything, right? Very, very small share of doctors, but they account for a large share of, the pills that kind of get out on the market. So for such a novel drug, the sales reps are kind of the first customer. You have to convince them first. So here we have our segments, right? We've identified all these different groups that we need to be marketing to in order to make this drug a success, right? So we kind of saw last class, strategic decisions, execution, and validation as being the sub-steps of designing your promotional campaign, right? So kind of thinking through these steps for each of the segments that Eli Lilly is targeting. So for patients, let's kind of break it down into, right, what was the objective? And then what was their choice of the sort of media and promotional mix in order to reach the patients? And when I say objective, think in terms of that, like either inform, persuade, remind, or in terms of that kind of like data-driven sales funnel approach. Yeah, so Shohei says inform. And maybe even more specifically, inform about what? About the benefits, about the attributes. We kind of want to do a few things, right? Maybe Yeah, so remind as well, like when they're running ads on TV, especially towards kind of the end of their patent period, right? When the drug is already very well known and popular. Yeah, that a drug like this exists. So awareness, the drug is out there. It can help you be happy. The benefits, right? Here's what it does, right? And then what about the sort of media and promotional mix? Kind of what were their main ways of reaching patients to achieve these objectives? Right, so public relations was probably the biggest one. Yeah, kind of going through scientific magazines, going through scientific organizations, kind of like the National Institute for Mental Health. Did anyone see anything as part of their media and promotional mix that was kind of like especially helpful in, say, like reducing the stigma? So I think yeah, Alexandra?
There was a lot of like news promotion. So in newspapers, like news, like TV news, and actual like medical magazines, and then financial magazines. Not just commercial, like it wasn't just the product, it was like, oh, look at this research behind it. So I feel like that made it seem more serious, if that makes sense. It wasn't just like, here's a product that we're commercializing like every other. It's like, here's the new wave and all the information behind it.
From a trusted source, and also like, you know, that it's scientific and not just not kind of a snake oil sort of situation where don't really know if it works or not. Like, no, we definitely know that it works. Here's the science. Here's trusted sources telling you about it. Yeah, Kathy.
Like also maybe through like celebrity endorsements. I'm not sure if that counts, but it just seemed like a lot of sort of like celebrity interviews, word of mouth, like kind of thing. They were all taking it and seeing benefits.
Right. So yeah, like seeing it so like I think Jim Carrey was the first guy to pop up there, but in general, yeah, seeing it on TV shows, seeing it kind of being written about in sort of popular press. So yeah, celebrity endorsements for sure. These endorsements probably were not ones that Eli Lilly paid for, but they were still helpful, right? Yeah, Athena?
There were a lot of ads and commercials just in women's magazines, like regular day-to-day TV shows, like in between that really personalized the medicine, just made it seem like it was for anyone and everyone that needed it, and there's no shame behind it.
Okay, good. So kind of like, yeah, maybe that's an interesting take. So basically by targeting specific groups, saying like, hey, like, you know, you guys have these particular problems and here's a drug that can help, you know, something about that specificity can help remove stigma. Abdullah?
Yeah, I think they were trying to normalize it. So they were using like music videos and even like a lot of ads and stuff like that.
Yeah, cool. So like it was kind of appearing everywhere. It definitely felt very normal.
Yeah.
So I guess before we move on from kind of talking about people, I'll just kind of pose a question. Do you guys think that it was sort of ethical to target people without issues in order to market it as a way to sort of be a better version of yourself? Yeah. So I would agree kind of with the not at all, right? So that's why you probably don't see any sort of like moral imperative behind any of this marketing, because they kind of know that what they're doing is not super ethical, right? Purely based on kind of like emotional things and based on rational things, right? In general, though, I mean, you kind of saw there was no legal action taken against Eli Lilly. I think that a lot of what seems like they're kind of targeting towards people without issues wasn't necessarily spearheaded by the company itself, but they didn't do anything to stop it either, right? They definitely benefited from that. Okay. So Next, we'll kind of think about the sort of primary care physicians and psychiatrists, right? So when you're thinking about marketing to these people, this segment, right, you're kind of wanting to do a few things, right? Emphasize that it's backed up by science, that it does provide a clear benefit for patients, right? Because we imagine doctors are fundamentally altruistic. That's why they're in the business, right? So they want things that will help the patient. And that's kind of our first highlighted bit. And then in the second bit, seeing that Prozac can actually act as a complement to talk therapy. So the two things can be mutually reinforcing, right? So the first one's definitely targeted towards physicians. And the second point, definitely targeted towards psychotherapists, right? People who might have been skeptical about the drug, but who are basically being pitched to that, no, this isn't going to replace you. In fact, it may even increase the demand for your service because they'll kind of work better together. So when we think about marketing to primary care physicians and psychiatrists, we can kind of think, right, the objectives there were mostly to persuade, right? Convince physicians that this alternative is a superior treatment compared to other alternatives, right? And I think there they were helped by the science that this actually seemed to be a better product, both easier to use for patients and easier to use for doctors. They did also do some informing, right? The mechanism of action, how it was actually working. And for their kind of promotional mix, you can think of it as primarily being personal selling, right? This idea of physician detailing, but then also academic conferences, kind of getting well-known academics to speak about it. These were kind of their main tools there, right? So it's kind of interesting that they have very different objectives for the physicians and psychiatrists than they do for the patients. And they also have very different media and kind of promotional mix, right? They're doing something very different here. It's purely personal selling. Right? Part of that is contextual. That's just how drugs are kind of advertised to doctors in the United States. Part of it is because, there is some kind of reputational component. These are kind of a big deal, especially, concerns about side effects, concerns about malpractice. So you really want to do kind of the personal thing and make sure that it feels like the drug is fully backed by the company that's selling it, right? Okay, so lastly, here we can see some quotes about the pricing of Prozac. So we can see at launch, Lilly is setting Prozac's wholesale price higher than the price for its best competitor, these TCA antidepressants. It's also a little bit lower than an anti-anxiety drug, Xanax, which has been around for a while. So we have kind of a bit of a higher price than the direct competitor though, right? In the next paragraph, we kind of see before covering a drug treatment, government and private medical insurers need to be convinced that it's necessary and that it's cost effective, right? So kind of, we see maybe two slightly different competing things here, right? The price is set higher than the alternative, but Prozac also needs to convince these insurers and the government that it's actually going to work, that it's cost effective, right? The insurers, what do they want to do? They want to spend as little money as possible to treat the patients who they're covering, right? Most bang for the buck. So why do you think Prozac, or why do you think Eli Lilly priced Prozac at such a premium compared to its alternative? Yeah, Abdullah. I think you're still muted. Oh, from last time. Okay. Yeah, Ramesh.
You can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I mean, I guess it's because their drug is like so effective, right? So like if they provide it to their patients, it has a higher success rate of, like, I guess, not curing them or making them better compared to like another drug that they might have to use several times and has a lower success rate. So it just costs them more money long term.
Right. Okay. So you're saying it could be, even though each pill is more expensive or each treatment day is more expensive, they're not going to have to be treated for as long. So that would save money. And then, okay, yeah. So I think that's a good point. I think if that was the hope for insurers, that definitely didn't pan out, because it seemed like people were kind of taking it and continuing to take it for quite a while. Shofai?
Maybe it's because it's a new drug and they need to move down the experience curve. So they want to price it high at first.
Great. So actually, very nice. Perhaps a dynamic pricing is being done, and they need to get better at making it. So actually, from what I understand, they actually raised, actually we can see in this paragraph, at the end of the first paragraph, Eli Lilly reviewed the price annually and made several upward adjustments over time. So actually they did do dynamic pricing, but they did penetration pricing, not price skimming, right? So penetration pricing, we don't typically think of as starting higher than your competitors and then going up from there, but this is what they did, and it ended up kind of working out for them. So in terms of this marketing, so they were basically trying to inform how the treatment works and show that sort of this total cost of treatment, like Ramesh mentioned, would basically be lower than with other drugs over time. And they kind of did it through personal selling. At the end of the day, though, one thing that's worth thinking about is if people want Prozac, they will sign up for insurance potentially to get it. So if it is kind of an in-demand drug, if the insurer is kind of doing their kind of pricing correctly, this sort of demand should generate more revenue for them at the end of the day. So Eli Lilly was definitely kind of taking advantage, though, of a dominant market position, right? They're a monopolist for as long as their patent is in place. And so they can raise the price if it seems like, people are really demanding this product, and they want to continue using it. Although, as far as I understand, this drug is not addictive and it's not possible to overdose on it. So, all right, so kind of wrapping up, overall marketing strategy: public relations at first, academic journals and magazines, get the physicians and psychiatrists on board. Then, this kind of broad range of stakeholders, the entire prescriber supply chain, including the insurers, needs to be aware of the benefits and the mechanisms. Then you kind of switch to advertising later on as competitors start to enter, you intensify. But here kind of the product took on a life of its own without any sort of attempt to sort of tamp it down by Eli Lilly. Like, they were definitely taking advantage of this sort of public phenomenon. Okay. So I think this is a nice case study to think about. The issue of mental health has kind of really exploded even before COVID, but definitely COVID kind of created a big new attention to it. But typically we're not thinking too much about psychopharmacology these days. We're thinking more about therapy. And we do have big companies entering the mental health space once again, right? We have things like Better Health, we have like Mind Beacon, we have all these companies that are sort of attempting to address mental health issues once again with a new product. So it's kind of interesting to see if, things will play out similarly to how they did in the past, with kind of new hyped products, things like teletherapy, on-call therapy, on-demand digital therapy, right? So good. I think that's kind of a place that we can stop, have a break. I'll be here during the break if you want to ask questions about anything, but otherwise we'll reconvene at 6:14 and then do a quick review and then talk about the presentations. 6:15, just switched over. Yeah, Tarek, go ahead.
For the presentations next week, how much detail do we go into regarding the marketing strategy? Like we just saw with this company and how they switched from different strategies throughout like the product life. So I don't know how much like you're expecting us to like expect to happen in the future of the product.
Almost nothing. Yeah, you don't have to describe. If you want to focus on something like dynamic pricing, or on like pricing over the life cycle, like do it based on like the very short term, kind of like what you see kind of the next year or two rolling out. But yeah, there's no expectation of going into anywhere this near of detail.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, there's check out the slides that I posted, kind of the sample slides, if you haven't already. I think those are kind of a good example for what level of detail I'm expecting for it to be a good presentation. All right. Let's get back into it. So I'm going to quickly run through all the concepts from all the lectures from the beginning of the course. And then we're going to kind of go through the multiple choice practice that you guys submitted, some of the questions there, and then we'll talk about presentations and things like that. So very first thing I showed you, this kind of marketing process, 5-step model, starting from need recognition, going all the way to kind of post-purchase. We talked about the consumer hierarchy of needs in lecture 2, marketing myopia, marketing management orientations, right? Like production, relationship marketing, etc. Then we did our kind of 2 tools, our SWOT analysis and our BCG growth share matrix for kind of analyzing an overall marketing situation for the company or for the business unit. And then we moved on to lecture 3. So marketing research was kind of a big thing here. We had this sort of 4-step process where we're thinking about kind of what is our research question, and then all the way through kind of collecting the data and interpreting. We have different types of data classification. So primary versus secondary, revealed versus stated preferences. We also talked a little bit about how to run experiments. I think there was a midterm question about this as well. You know, if you're trying to know the effect of changing X, make sure that X is the only thing that's changing when you're trying to compare the outcomes across 2 groups. Then we talked in the second half about kind of rational consumer behavior, consumer perceived value, customer relations management, so CPV, perceived performance, and CS. And then the buyer decision process, starting from need recognition through post-purchase behavior and consideration sets. Lecture 4, this was the psychological consumer decision-making lecture. So we have biases in consumer behavior, all these different kind of price tricks to raise CPV, you know, anchoring, perception biases, context effects like the decoy effect and the compromise effect, and then thinking about choice overload and imitation versus differentiation, simplicity versus descriptiveness, manipulation of the valuation of products by sort of inducing these feelings cues, like with the pen study, like shaking your head study as well. Now we talked about the endowment effect, which was probably one of the most important concepts in the lecture. How can you induce it, right? How do you induce a feeling of ownership without actually giving the product away? Talked about all kinds of different ways you can do that. And we talked about loss aversion as being the source of the endowment effect. And then how customer satisfaction and perceived performance change when we're thinking about them in the context of the endowment effect. Lecture 5 was our segmentation, targeting, positioning, and differentiation. So this was a big lecture. We talked about like, what is a segment? Why do you segment? What are the different ways that you can segment? You know, the dangers of pigeonholing, and kind of more broadly, like what does effective segmentation look like? So yeah, segmentation, it's really one of the key things you should take away from this course, sort of how to kind of conduct this process of segmentation and targeting, because it's just extremely relevant to any sort of marketing or business context you're going to find yourself in. We talked then about targeting strategies. Once you do have your segments, how do you want to target them? And then positioning and differentiation. We had a few tools there, setting up your POP, your POD, and then the map, and then finally summarizing everything with one positioning statement, which I think is always a good thing to be able to do, especially for your project. All right, so that was all pre-midterm. Post-midterm, lecture 6 was the kind of asynchronous one about the product. So we had levels of a product, differentiating products through experiences. So levels, we had like core benefit, and then the actual product, and then the augmented product. It is a cumulative exam. There is going to be more emphasis on post-midterm material. So classifying products, yeah, consumer versus business, different types of consumer products, different stages of the product life cycle, products versus services. What are the key differences there? We also talked a little bit there about how classifying a product helps you make decisions about it, right? The point of classifying is to make things clearer when you're doing your analysis. Special features of a service, right? Okay, here was another kind of fun part of this lecture. How do you select product features? You have revealed preference, which I spent more time on, versus conjoint analysis. Revealed preference was kind of using very simple data to figure out what are the things about a product that people actually value. Then we talked about brands, brand equity, brand development strategies. This was the question, the survey that week about Go Transit. And then we have kind of brand strategy decisions like positioning. How do you position your brand? Attributes versus beliefs versus benefits. Brand name selection and brand development. So that was lecture 6. Lecture 7, that was pricing, right? Price and profit maximization. What are the factors a firm should consider when setting prices? The demand curve and marginal cost curve. So how do you set the prices? If I give you kind of a few individuals, here's their valuations. What's the price that you should pick? We went through that in detail. And then we talked about the approximately optimal pricing formula, right? When you can apply that, how you can apply that, what data you need to apply that. Then price discrimination for a second and third degree, screening and sales. So this was all the first half of the lecture, pricing a single product, potentially different prices to different people, but always the same product. Then we talked about dynamic pricing, price penetration, price skimming. So one is price going up and the other is price going down, but not in that order. Then we had bundling. That's our kind of multi-product pricing discussion. When is bundling good? And kind of what price should we set for a bundle if I give you some sort of simple consumers and their valuations. Then we talked about 3-part tariffs and 2-part tariffs, very, very briefly about business pricing, and then price matching and showrooming for the Best Buy example at the end of the lecture. Lecture 8, this was place, AKA marketing channels. So the 8 ways that channel partners add value we covered. We talked about economies of scale and fixed costs, and sort of like when should you work with a big channel distributor like a Best Buy versus when should you go it alone. Disintermediation versus intermediation, and then which type of distribution. If you do go for an intermediated route, intensive, selective, or exclusive. And then we also talked about digital commerce stuff, e-commerce. What are the economic frictions that are reduced for buyers and sellers with digital commerce? And then we talked about m-commerce. What's the difference between m-commerce and e-commerce? Then platform economics. So our indirect network effects was one thing that we focused on. And pricing. So indirect network effects, right? When you have a platform and you have 2 different groups who are meeting on that platform to conduct direct exchange with each other, how should you price? And then just last week, we did lecture 9. We have sort of this 6-step process for managing marketing communications. So what kind of objectives do we have? Right? We have inform, persuade, remind, but then we also have the data-driven marketing communications objectives, moving people through the funnel, reducing churn in the waterfall, things like that. Briefly, we talked about internal communications. Then we talked about designing a message, right? So the appeals and themes, reducing advertising sort of clutter through advertainment and branded entertainment. And then we talked about the marketing communication mix. So those 5 different things we can do. Advertising is only one of them. And then we talked about media, and we really just focused on online advertising as kind of like our main focus. So we kind of broke that down further. What are the different types of online advertising? And at the very end of that, we had online advertising budgets, spending rules, sort of like when should you pay for a particular sort of online advertising campaign, right? Ooh, okay. I'm gonna take a break here for 1 second. See if you guys have any questions. All right. So next we're gonna go through the multiple choice questions. Feel free to respond in chat with what you think the answer is. We'll start off nice and easy. Which marketing management orientation emphasizes price and place? So this is a purely definitional question. Going way back here. I've seen some A's and some B's. So it's A. The answer is A, production orientation. Selling focuses on promotion. Production is, making it cheap and ubiquitous. Yeah, so it's A here. Okay, another definition question. In accordance with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the most fundamental need that must be met? Yeah, physiological needs. It's that big one at the bottom of the pyramid. Okay. Here's a nice one. This one would be like an application question. Schools and universities are switching from remote to in-person. From Zoom's perspective, what does this represent in SWOT? Seeing some C's and I'm seeing some D's. I just saw an A. So we're switching from remote to in-person. Yeah, we're kind of exiting the pandemic now. So that's going to be D. It should be a threat for them, right? Okay. All right, here's one about Kanye. Kanye West's brand of shoes has a high market share, but they have low growth after his newly released album, Donda. It's expected that the popularity and growth of the brand will remain more or less stable. According to the BCG growth share matrix, what option is best for the owners of Ye or Ye? Hold and maintain, build, sell, liquidate. Yeah, E. Hold and maintain, right? Why hold and maintain? Because this looks like a cash cow, and hold and maintain is the recommendation for cash cow. Okay, some more BCG question. Which of the following is not an ideal strategy for a company with a low market share and high growth rate? Not ideal. So what's a low market share and high growth rate? Yeah, low market share and high growth rate is question mark. So the question here is, what is not ideal? And so I think I may not have edited this question, or I edited it too lightly. I think there's multiple answers here, right? I think holding is definitely not ideal. I think harvest can be ideal. Let me check the slides on this one. All right, question mark. No, harvest and divest are often good for question marks. All right, I was wrong. Yeah, it's just B. It's just hold. Hold is the answer. Good question. All right, so B is our answer. Do not hold. Do anything but hold. All right. Help Ever insurance company wants to encourage people to get their insurance by reminding them to get regular checkups and all their vaccinations. Which marketing management orientation is the most suitable? I kind of debated this one. This won't be included in the final because I think you can argue for any of them. Like we've seen, you can argue for any orientation. But if you had to pick one, I'm seeing some E's for societal marketing. I think E would be my answer, just because you do have the benefits of vaccination are to help other people as well, right? And they're not just for you, right? So societal marketing seems like the right thing, but you won't get anything that's kind of ambiguous that you can kind of argue for as a multiple choice. If this was a short answer question, I would probably ask something like, it's multi-part. I would say like, okay, part 1, argue why societal marketing might be the best. Part 2, argue why, production orientation might be the best, something like that. All right, on to lecture 3, consumer behavior. Water bottle company is trying to do a research plan on how to increase its target market. They think a causal research objective is the best way to do so. Which of the following research objectives would fit this request? Seeing some B's. I'm seeing mostly B's. Why B? Well, it looks like A, C, and D are all fairly descriptive. Like these are not like, what is the effect of changing this on that, right? D looks kind of close to B, but it's not a question about like, if I change something, how will people react? B does look like that sort of phrasing. If we change this, will this other thing be affected? So that would be our causal question, B. Okay, cafe considering adding a new pastry to its menu. To decide what to add, the cafe conducts research to get data about consumers' preferences on which pastries go best with coffee or tea. They post a survey in their cafe and ask consumers to fill it out. What kind of data is being collected? Yeah, primary and stated. Agreed. What is an example of the decoy effect? This is a good one. Yeah, I'm seeing mostly Ds. B sounds plausible, but like if you didn't know what the decoy effect was, you'd think, oh, it could be B, but we know what the decoy effect is. Yeah. Okay. Company wants to ensure it retains its customers. What should they focus on? Yeah, I agree with B. A and C should help increase CPV. So should D and E. So yeah, B is the only one left. Tim owns a bakery called Cinnabread, which is known for their cinnamon smell. He decides to do some renovations, which includes upgrading their ventilation system. He notices that the number of consumers that visit his bakery has dropped significantly after renovating. Why might this have occurred? Choose the best answer. Yeah, C feels like the best answer. I think the writer of this question suggested that E was the correct answer. I think I would go with C. I mean, with B, it's hard to know if two things change at once. It's hard to know which is the thing that's leading to the negative effect. But C is definitely the thing that we learned about. I like all the product names you guys have come up with too. Like, it's not necessary, but it definitely adds some flavor. Warranty package for your new car from Lubrico. 3 packages to choose from. 1-year engine and transmission for $7.99. 2-year engine and transmission for $14.99. 2-year engine and transmission plus tire and glass for $14.99. What are we seeing here? Yeah, D for decoy. Okay. Which of the following is not representative of a POP versus a POD? So which is not representative? We'll kind of go through champion, POP, soft and comfortable. POD, logo is a fashion statement. There's Kanye again. B, Apple iPhone. POP takes calls. POD texts someone. Yeah, it definitely feels like B. You can kind of go further. But yeah, it feels like B, right? Okay, there's spicy chips. Jonathan says maybe C also. POP, you can blow your nose. POD, there's a pretty design on the box. Yeah, truthfully, so a question like this is hard for me to ask you guys on the final, just because it requires knowing something about these brands that I can't really take for granted, that you guys should know. So I wouldn't ask something like this. I mean, I would ask you something if there was like a Lexus car and then maybe other brands that we've already looked at. So Apple, maybe, you know, House of Marley, and then something else, but never for brands that kind of we don't know. All right, spicy and salty chips are available. What does this mean in marketing terms? I think this is a good one. Yeah, it's fairly split here. Some people are saying B, usage rate. So usage rate we typically think of as some people buy a lot bigger things and some people buy smaller things, or some people use it more than others. And I mean, you could maybe argue that it's hard to eat spicy chips quickly, but so the usage rate would be lower, I guess. But this definitely feels more like psychographic, taste-based, right? Some people just like spicy and some people prefer salty. So I'd go with D. Okay, here's one that I definitely can ask you because we've talked so much about Toyota. How does Toyota target? Undifferentiated, differentiated, concentrated. So targeting was in our segmentation section, right? Undifferentiated means you serve everyone with the same thing. Differentiated is you serve everyone, but different segments get different things. Concentrated means you're only serving one segment, and they're getting whatever the thing is. So this would be a B, right? For a few reasons, right? We have different brands for different segments within a kind of segment. We have different types of car for different people within that kind of subsegment. Yeah, we have definitely a differentiated strategy by Toyota. Okay, just a nice straightforward definition question. What type of segmentation divides the markets into groups based on social class, lifestyle, or personality characteristics? Yeah, this one should be D, psychographic. Straight off the slides. My Way, or Mississauga Transit, single fare, 175 for child, youth, 235, adult, 310, senior, 210. Is student youth? What's youth? Someone explain to me in chat. But what kind of segmentation is this? Younger than 12. Okay. Yeah, I think, all right, so it's definitely C. 12 to 19. Okay. Do you guys pay full price? Oh man, all right. All the UN says. All right. Which of the following is not an element in behavioral segmentation? Occasions, nations, user status, usage rate, loyalty status. Yeah, B for sure. That's geographic. Which statement is false? These ones are always, yeah, I feel like you always have to do a lot more reading with these. Convenience products are products that consumers usually buy frequently with low buying effort. No. Shopping products, compare. No, that's not false. Yeah, should be D in the end. This one makes me do a lot of reading. It's a good question. All right, next one. Augmented component of a product. Any product used in the augmented reality industry. Additional services. Product that serves only one purpose. Products in the tech industry. Yeah, this one should be B. B. Okay. Next up, products that the consumer either does not know about or knows about but does not normally consider buying are, yeah, unsought products. We kind of already read through all this one. So D is the answer here. Which of the following option best describes a product where we should use price skimming? Seeing some Ds, I would agree with D. Yeah, special products and then products bought only once and lasting for a long time. This one would be coming straight off the slides where we kind of like laid out when do you do price skimming versus price penetration pricing. What must a firm be able to do to achieve perfect price discrimination? Perfect price discrimination. That was everyone gets charged exactly their willingness to pay. Yeah, it should be E. You have to be able to segment the market. So pick out each individual person, stop them from selling to each other, charge each one a different price. Yeah, and I think this comes right from the slides too. Best Buy starts selling a product from a new brand. You can only find the product on the brand's website and in Best Buy stores. What mode of distribution did the new brand use? Seeing some C's. Exclusive distribution. Exclusive means one place only, right? That would be like IKEA. Yeah, I think it should be B here. Yeah, two places, website and Best Buy stores. All right. What is not a key feature of e-commerce selling platforms? What doesn't e-commerce do? I think this is kind of pick the best answer. Yeah, should be C. We know that e-commerce helps overcome geographic isolation, but calling geographic isolation a key feature of e-commerce doesn't really make sense. So definitely C. Say you have a product that you're developing yourself, you want crowdfunding. Which of the following does a crowdfunding company assist in the development of your products? So why partner with Kickstarter as your channel partner? Yeah, gotta be B. That's the only thing they do for you. Everything else you're on your own. All right, last few. Here's a good one. National Bank of Canada has recently lowered its stock trade commission to $0. This one feels like it might be true. Like this is based on a true story. You want to compete against Wealthsimple, which was previously the only stock trading broker who offered $0 commission trades. You've been appointed as the marketing manager for their advertising program to advertise the new $0 commission trading. Which of the three advertising objectives should you pursue? Actually, now that I remember, this was based on a true account. I think I lightly edited the question so that it feels like maybe there's one good answer. But again, this would be potentially a question that's better as a short answer, where you kind of argue for different things. Although here, because we don't know too much, I would need to give you more context. Yeah, definitely more so a short answer. So if we're trying to pick the very best one though, fortunately there's no like none of the above option or all of the above. So if we're trying to pick the best one, reducing churn, that was part of our like waterfall based, trying to reduce the number of people who are current customers who would be kind of exiting by next year. So it doesn't feel super appropriate because here we're trying to like advertise a new product that we just created, right? So there's not really any customers using it who could churn. So strike A. Persuade feels plausible, especially given this kind of phrasing of we're competing against Wealthsimple, who's kind of the dominant leader for zero commission trades right now. Remind doesn't exist yet. So what are we reminding people of? If that was inform, then this might be a bit of a horse race, but it's not. So strike remind. Should you pursue personal selling? That's not an advertising objective. That's like a promotional mix choice, right? So strike D and then strike E as well. Sales promotion is not an objective. It's a promotional mix choice. So that kind of leaves us with B as the best answer, which Robert indicated in chat, which I agree. Yeah, like persuade is the thing to do. I feel like it's a bit hard to persuade if they're not, like their point of parity is zero commission trades. Kind of curious what their point of difference is. Like the one that, for Wealthsimple, I know that they charge a foreign exchange fee if you buy a foreign stock, which is like a percentage of the price, which kind of sucks. Yeah. So you have to buy like the Canadian version of the S&P 500 ETF or whatever. Anyway. It was a good question. Probably a bit too involved for a multiple choice, but quite good. Might see a modified version of this. What are the 6 elements of the communication process? This one should be right from the slides. Sender, encoding, message, decoding, receiver feedback is E. Sender, encoding, message, decoding, receiver noise, D. Yeah, it should be D. D is the one. Yeah, for definition questions like this, I mean, you'll be writing the exam at your computers, you'll have access to the slides, right? So you should be able to kind of check these out, the definition ones. So you should probably expect to see more application than definition, given that kind of looking stuff up on slides, just getting the definition is not a great way to evaluate what you guys have learned. All right, the very last question, which is the following is not a type of online advertising. Yeah, this one should be E. And this one, yeah, this too is from the slides. A through D are kind of listed out on lecture 9. All right, perfect. So that was kind of a nice preview. That was a nice review as well. So thanks. If you didn't see your question, it's probably just because I knew there'd be kind of time constraints. So I tried to just pick a nice diversity. So thanks everyone who submitted. All right, next class, first round of presentations. It's 12 minutes of speaking time. You share it equally among your group members. I've posted example slides on Quirkus under that first section. Check those out to see. I think they're both similar, but also a bit different in terms of things like how they present research. So, you know, they're both kind of good examples to go off of. They both did well. Timing is going to be strict. So as you're speaking, I'll give you an indication, 2 minutes left, 1 minute left. Once your time is up, you're going to get asked to finish your sentence, and that's it. In the past, almost no one kind of goes over time, but it does happen once or twice. So don't be going over time, because you won't get a chance to say everything. And then, you know, I won't get to see all the work that you've done. After you've finished, I'll ask questions, probably just 1 or 2 questions, while the next group gets set up and starts sharing screen. So one person in the group for each group will share the slides. So I'll enable anyone to be able to share. And that person is responsible for transitions. So practice kind of doing the screen sharing on Zoom when you do your sort of trial presentation. If you want, you can come to office hours and just kind of like test that out if you're interested, and get feedback on your slides. So presentation order, this should be copied directly from Quirkus. So yeah, we have 7 groups on each day. Yeah, this is just a repeat. So there's kind of some FAQs for presentations. Here they are. What counts as research? These things. Doesn't have to be a survey. It can be a survey, but doesn't have to be. I'm not expecting a survey for it to be good research. You just need to back up decisions that you make, right? If you make a big decision like, oh, you know, I'm going to go for, you know, dynamic pricing, I'm going to do penetration pricing, and you're doing it in a market where the product is like, it looks more like a very specialty product that should be price skimming. I'm going to want to see like, okay, why did you make that choice, right? What factor led you to make that choice? So anything that seems like a big decision, back it up. And it could be online searches, or it could be talking to people, you know, getting quotes. Quotes are always nice to see from people you've spoken to, doing surveys on Instagram or whatever, and kind of showing bar charts or pie plots. Always nice to see. How much research should there be? Just kind of covered that. Is the project graded as a group? It is. That should be on the syllabus. Should the presentation cover everything in the report? No. Condensed version. Just highlight the most interesting decisions. You know, you do want to go through the 4 Ps and some element of the strategy. But other than, you know, there's a lot of room on what you want to focus on there. Cool. So I'll stick around. Are there any questions about the presentations that I haven't answered yet? Okay, so, you know, you guys have done your progress reports. You should all be kind of on track. Anyone presenting next week, I definitely recommend coming to office hours, stopping in so that we can kind of look at your slides. But if not, then yeah, I will see you guys next week. I'm going to open the class a little bit early, but we will be starting at 5:10 like usual. So the first group, which I think is group 2, should expect to start right at 5:10. All right, awesome. I will, yeah, see you guys next week, and shoot me an email if you have more questions.